The sun had just dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the quiet streets of Crestwood City. The air was cool, carrying with it a faint scent of rain that hadn't yet arrived. Detective Marcus Reed stood outside his car, staring at the towering silhouette of General Kane's mansion, perched on a hill at the edge of town. It loomed like a fortress, its windows dark and unwelcoming, almost as if it were daring anyone to step closer. Marcus tightened his grip on the flashlight in his hand and took a deep breath. This wasn't going to be easy, but he knew what he had to do. Marcus wasn't your typical cop. He'd spent years working in some of the toughest neighborhoods in the city, earning a reputation for being relentless and sharp-witted. But this case was different. Rumors about General Kane had been swirling around town for weeks. Whispers of stolen secrets, hidden treasures, and dangerous traps. Some said Kane was a genius strategist who could outsmart anyone. Others claimed he was paranoid, building elaborate defenses to protect himself from enemies real or imagined. Whatever. The truth was, one thing was certain. Tonight, Marcus would find out. Earlier that day, an anonymous tip had landed on Marcus's desk. The note was short and cryptic. Kane's mansion, study room, safe, classified documents. There was no signature, no explanation, nothing to trace back to the sender. But Marcus didn't need much convincing, if there was even a chance. Those documents existed. They could expose crimes that reached far beyond the borders of Crestwood City. So here he was, standing under the cover of darkness, ready to face whatever lay ahead. As Marcus approached the mansion, he couldn't help but feel uneasy. Something about the place felt wrong, not scary exactly, but unsettling, like stepping into a dream where things aren't quite what they seem. The iron gates creaked open easily enough, unlocked and unguarded. That alone should have raised red flags, but Marcus pushed the thought aside. Maybe Kane didn't think anyone would dare trespass on his property, or maybe he wanted someone to come inside. The gravel crunched beneath Marcus's boots as he made his way up the winding driveway. The mansion grew larger with each step, its grandeur both impressive and intimidating. Ivy clung to the stone walls, giving the structure an ancient, almost haunted look. When Marcus reached the front door, he hesitated for a moment before pushing it open. To his surprise, it swung inward without resistance, revealing a dimly lit hallway lined with expensive furniture and shelves filled with books. Every instinct screamed at him to turn back. This was too easy, too convenient. But Marcus reminded himself why he was here. If Kane really did have classified documents, they needed to be recovered, not just for justice, but for national security. Taking a deep breath, Marcus stepped inside, his flashlight cutting through the darkness like a blade. The air inside the mansion was cold and still, as though the house itself were holding its breath. Marcus moved cautiously, his footsteps echoing softly against the marble floors. Portraits of stern-faced men and women stared down at him from the walls, their eyes seeming to follow his every move. At the end of the hallway, a set of double doors stood slightly ajar, spilling faint light into the corridor. The study. Marcus pushed the doors open wider and stepped inside. The room was massive, with high ceilings and walls covered in bookshelves. In the center of the room sat a large mahogany desk, and behind it, embedded into the wall, was a steel safe. It gleamed faintly in the glow of his flashlight, looking impenetrable and foreboding. Marcus walked over to it, his heart pounding in his chest. This was it, the reason he'd come all this way. But as he examined the safe more closely, something caught his eye. There were scratches around the dial, tiny marks that suggested someone had tried and failed to crack it before. Whoever had attempted this must have known what they were doing, yet they hadn't succeeded. That made Marcus even more cautious. What kind of safe required such skill to open? And what would happen if he got it wrong? He glanced around the room, searching for any signs of traps or cameras. Nothing seemed out of place, but the feeling of unease lingered. Finally, after several minutes of careful observation, Marcus decided to proceed. He knelt in front of the safe and began turning the dial, listening intently for the telltale clicks that indicated the correct numbers. His hands were steady, despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. 1 click, 2 clicks, 3 clicks. Slowly, the mechanism began to give way. Just as Marcus thought he was close to unlocking the safe, a faint sound echoed through the room. It was soft, almost imperceptible, like the whisper of wind brushing against glass. Marcus froze, his fingers hovering above the dial. Had he imagined it? He turned his head slowly, scanning the shadows for movement. Nothing. The room remained silent and still. Shaking off the paranoia, Marcus returned his focus to the safe. A few more turns of the dial, and he heard the satisfying clunk of the lock disengaging. For a brief moment, relief washed over him. He'd done it. He'd cracked the safe. But as he reached out to pull the heavy door open, a voice inside his head whispered a warning. Why would Kane leave something so valuable unprotected? Before Marcus could act on that thought, the lights in the room flickered violently, plunging the space into darkness. Panic surged through him as the temperature dropped sharply, making the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. Then came the sound, a low, mechanical whirring that seemed to emanate from everywhere and nowhere, all. At once, Marcus scrambled to his feet, shining his flashlight around the room, but the beam revealed only empty corners and closed doors. Suddenly, a panel in the floor slid open beside him, revealing a narrow staircase leading downward. More panels followed, each opening to reveal additional paths branching off in different directions. Marcus's mind raced. Was this part of Kane's plan? Had he triggered some sort of booby trap by opening the safe? Before he could decide what to do next, a robotic voice boomed overhead, startling him. "Welcome, Detective," the voice said, calm and measured. "You've taken the first step. Now choose wisely. Only one path leads to freedom." Freedom? Marcus frowned, trying to make sense of the situation. He was trapped in a maze designed by a man whose intellect rivaled the greatest minds in history. Every decision he made from this point forward could mean the difference between life and death. But Marcus wasn't about to give up. He'd faced impossible odds before, and he'd always found a way to win. Taking a deep breath, Marcus stepped toward the nearest staircase, his flashlight held firmly in front of him. He didn't know what awaited him below, but one thing was clear. General Kane wasn't going to let him walk away without a fight, and Marcus intended to prove that he was more than capable of rising to the challenge. Marcus descended the narrow staircase, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness like a knife. The air grew colder with each step, carrying with it a faint metallic smell that made his stomach churn. Below him stretched a long corridor, its walls lined with strange symbols carved into the stone. They glowed faintly, pulsating in rhythm with the mechanical whirring that echoed around him. It was as if the mansion itself were alive, watching his every move. As he reached the bottom of the stairs, Marcus paused, scanning the corridor for any signs of danger. The robotic voice had warned him to choose wisely, but there was no clear indication of what lay ahead, or what might happen if he chose wrong. To his left, the corridor curved sharply, disappearing into shadow. To his right, it extended, straight ahead, ending at a heavy wooden door reinforced with iron bands. Both paths looked equally ominous, but Marcus knew he couldn't afford to hesitate. Time was running out. Deciding to take the straight path first, Marcus moved cautiously toward the wooden door. As he approached, he noticed something etched into its surface, a series of numbers arranged in a grid, like a puzzle waiting to be solved. Below the grid was a small keypad, its buttons worn smooth from use. Marcus frowned. Another test. He wasn't surprised. Kane wouldn't make things easy, but this added layer of complexity only deepened his unease. He examined the grid carefully, searching for patterns or clues. The numbers ranged from 1 to 9, arranged in 3 rows of 3. Some were circled, others crossed out, and a few were highlighted in red. Marcus's mind raced as he tried to decipher the logic behind the arrangement. Was it a math problem, a riddle, or something else entirely? After several minutes of intense concentration, Marcus thought he spotted a pattern. The circled numbers formed a sequence: 3, 7, 2. He hesitated, unsure whether to trust his instincts. What if he was wrong? But the robotic voice had said only, one path led to freedom. If this door was the right choice, solving the puzzle might unlock it. Taking a deep breath, Marcus entered the sequence into the keypad. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a loud click, the door creaked open, revealing a small room beyond. Marcus stepped inside, his flashlight illuminating the space. The room was bare except for a single table in the center, upon which rested an old-fashioned hourglass. Sand trickled steadily from the top bulb to the bottom, marking the passage of time. Next to the hourglass was a note written in elegant handwriting. Time is your ally or your enemy. Solve the next challenge before the sand runs out. Marcus's heart sank. He glanced at the hourglass. Less than half the sand remained. Whatever the next challenge was, he didn't have much time to figure it out. Turning his attention back to the room, he noticed another door on the far wall. Unlike the first, this one was sealed shut, its surface covered in intricate carvings that seemed to shift and change when viewed from different angles. In the center of the door was a slot just wide enough to fit a key. A key. But where was it? Marcus searched the room frantically, running his hands along the walls and checking under the table. There was no sign of a key anywhere. Frustration bubbled up inside him, but he forced himself to stay calm. Panicking wouldn't help. Instead, he focused on the details, looking for anything he might have missed. His eyes landed on the hourglass, again. Something about it felt off. The sand wasn't falling evenly. Instead, it seemed to pause briefly every few seconds, as though controlled by some unseen mechanism. Marcus picked it up, examining it closely. On the base of the hourglass, he found a tiny switch hidden beneath a layer of dust. Without hesitation, he flipped it. The hourglass shuddered, and the remaining sand poured out all at once, forming a perfect spiral on the floor. When the last grain fell, a compartment in the base of the hourglass popped open, revealing a small brass key. Marcus exhaled sharply, relief washing over him. He grabbed the key and hurried to the door, inserting it into the slot. With a soft click, the door swung open. Beyond it lay yet another corridor, this one narrower and more claustrophobic than the last. The walls were lined with shelves, each holding dozens of glass jars filled with strange objects. Gears, wires, shards of metal, and other unidentifiable components. At regular intervals, motion-activated lights flickered on as Marcus passed, casting eerie shadows that danced across the ceiling. The robotic voice returned, its tone eerily cheerful. Well, done, Detective. You're proving to be quite resourceful. But don't celebrate just yet. Marcus ignored the taunt, pressing forward with determination. The corridor ended abruptly at a large chamber dominated by a massive machine in the center. The contraption resembled a clockwork puzzle, its gears spinning and clicking in a hypnotic rhythm. Above it hung a digital display counting down from 10 minutes. Beside the machine was another note. Align the gears correctly to proceed. Fail, and the consequences will be severe. Marcus swallowed hard. 10 minutes wasn't much time, especially for a task this complex. He studied the machine carefully, noting how the gears interlocked and rotated. Each gear had markings on its edges, symbols that matched those on the walls of the corridors he'd traversed earlier. It dawned on him that the solution required matching the symbols on the gears to their corresponding positions based on the sequence he'd seen throughout the maze. With trembling hands, Marcus began adjusting the gears, turning them slowly until the symbols aligned. The process was painstaking, requiring absolute precision. Every mistake cost precious seconds, and the countdown loomed overhead like a ticking bomb. Sweat dripped from his brow as he worked, his muscles aching from the effort. But finally, with less than 30 seconds to spare, the last gear clicked, into place. The machine roared to life, its gears spinning faster and faster until they blurred into motion. Then with a deafening clang, it stopped. A panel on the far side of the chamber slid open, revealing a staircase leading upward. Marcus didn't waste a second. He bolted toward the exit, climbing the stairs two at a time. His legs burned, but adrenaline kept him moving. He had no idea what awaited him above, but he knew one thing for certain. Kane's game wasn't over yet. When Marcus emerged from the staircase, he found himself back in the study where he'd started. The safe stood open, its contents still untouched. But now, lying on the desk beside it, was a new envelope. Unlike the first, this one bore his name in bold letters. Detective Marcus Reed. Heart-pounding, Marcus opened the envelope and pulled out a single sheet of paper. Written on it was a message that sent chills down his spine. You've proven yourself worthy of my respect, detective, but remember this. I always stay one step ahead. We'll meet again soon. Before Marcus could react, the sound of slow, deliberate clapping filled the room. He spun around, his flashlight beam landing on a figure standing in the doorway. It was General Kane himself, dressed impeccably in a tailored suit, a sly smile playing on his lips. Congratulations, Kane said, his voice smooth and measured. You've survived the first round. But tell me, detective, how does it feel to know you're playing my game? Marcus clenched his fists, anger bubbling beneath the surface. This isn't a game, he shot back. What you're doing is illegal, and I'm taking you down. Kane chuckled softly, shaking his head. We'll see about that. For now, consider this a lesson. Intelligence alone won't save you. Strategy is everything. Without another word, Kane turned and walked away, leaving Marcus alone in the study. The detective stared after him, his mind racing. Kane had outsmarted him tonight, but Marcus wasn't about to let it end here. He vowed silently that the next time they met, he'd be ready. And so the stage was set for their ultimate showdown, a battle of wits between two brilliant minds, each determined to emerge victorious. Marcus stood frozen in the study, his mind reeling as General Kane's words echoed in the silence. The envelope clutched tightly in his hand felt heavier than it should, as if it carried more weight than just paper. Kane had vanished as quickly as he'd appeared, leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions. What was the purpose of these traps? Was this all some twisted game designed to test Marcus's limits? Or was there something darker at play? Forcing himself to focus, Marcus took a deep breath and scanned the room once again. The safe stood open, its hollow interior mocking him with its emptiness. Whatever secrets Kane claimed to possess weren't here, not yet, at least. But the message in the envelope made one thing clear. Kane wasn't done playing games. If Marcus wanted answers, he'd have to dig deeper, and fast. Determined not to let Kane slip away, Marcus retraced his steps through the mansion, searching for any clues that might lead him closer to the truth. As he moved from room to room, he noticed subtle details he'd overlooked before, faint scorch marks on the walls, tiny cameras hidden in the corners, and strange symbols etched into the floorboards. Each discovery added another piece to the puzzle, but none provided a clear path forward. It was as though Kane had anticipated every move Marcus might make, staying several steps ahead at all times. Eventually, Marcus found himself back in the grand hallway where his journey had begun. He paused by the staircase leading to the upper floors, debating whether to explore further. Something about the house felt different now, less like a trap and more like a challenge. Kane had invited him into his world, daring him to solve its mysteries. And Marcus couldn't resist the call. Climbing the stairs, Marcus entered a long corridor lined with doors. Each door bore a label written in elegant script: strategy, deception, patience. The labels seemed almost poetic, hinting at lessons Marcus would need to learn if he hoped to outsmart Kane. Choosing the first door marked strategy, he pushed it open and stepped inside. The room beyond was unlike anything Marcus had seen before. It resembled a war room, complete with maps spread across tables, miniature models of cities, and shelves filled with books on military tactics. In the center of the room stood a large chessboard, its pieces arranged mid-game. A note rested beside. Every move has consequences. Plan carefully, detective. Marcus approached the chessboard cautiously, studying the positions of the pieces. At first glance, it appeared to be an ordinary game. But upon closer inspection, he realized it was far from simple. Some squares glowed faintly, while others were marked with symbols similar to those he'd encountered earlier. Clearly, this wasn't just about winning, it was about survival. Taking a seat, Marcus began analyzing the board. Years of experience taught him to think several moves ahead, anticipating his opponent's strategy while planning his own. But this time, the stakes were higher. One wrong move could trigger another trap, or worse. Slowly, methodically, Marcus plotted his course, moving pieces with precision and care. As he played, memories of past cases flooded his mind. He recalled moments when quick thinking had saved lives and times when hesitation had cost dearly. Those experiences shaped him into the detective he was today, a man who thrived under pressure. Yet even now, facing off against Kane's genius, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that he was being tested in ways he didn't fully understand. After what felt like hours, Marcus reached a critical point in the game. Only 2 moves remained, one that led to checkmate and another that opened up endless possibilities. He hesitated, weighing the risks and rewards of each option. Finally, trusting his instincts, he chose the latter. The moment his hand released the piece, the entire room trembled. Lights flickered and a hidden panel in the wall slid open, revealing a narrow passageway. "Interesting choice," came Kane's voice, echoing softly as if spoken from afar. "Let's see how far you're willing to go." Ignoring the taunt, Marcus stepped into the passageway, his flashlight illuminating the cramped space. The air grew colder with each step, carrying with it the faint scent of damp earth. After a short distance, the tunnel widened into a small chamber dominated by a massive vault door. Unlike the safe downstairs, this one looked ancient. Its surface, covered in intricate carvings that told stories of battles fought and won. In the center of the door was a dial surrounded by runes instead of numbers. A new challenge. Marcus studied the runes closely, recognizing some from earlier parts of the mansion. They represented concepts rather than quantities: strength, courage, wisdom. To unlock the door, he'd need to align them in a sequence that reflected their meanings. It was a test of understanding, not brute force. Drawing on everything he'd learned so far, Marcus began turning the dial. Strength came first, followed by courage, then wisdom. With each alignment, the door groaned slightly, as if awakening from a long slumber. Finally, after the last rune clicked into place, the door creaked open, revealing a vast underground chamber bathed in dim blue light. Inside, rows of monitors displayed live footage of the mansion's corridors and rooms. Cameras tracked Marcus's movements, capturing every step he'd taken since entering the house. Sitting at a desk in the center of the chamber was General Kane, watching the screens with detached amusement. Beside him lay stacks of documents, files and photographs, all evidence of crimes Marcus couldn't begin to comprehend. "You've come far," Kane said without looking up. "But tell me, Detective, do you truly believe you can stop me?" Marcus stepped forward, his jaw set with determination. "I don't need to believe it," he replied. "I'll prove it." Kane chuckled, leaning back in his chair. "Admirable. But remember this, knowledge is power, and I hold all the cards." Before Marcus could respond, alarms blared throughout the chamber, red lights flashing wildly. Kane rose to his feet, his expression calm despite the chaos unfolding around them. "It seems our time together has come to an end, for now. But don't worry, Detective, our paths will cross again." With that, Kane pressed a button on his desk and the ground beneath Marcus gave way. He barely had time to react before plunging into darkness, landing hard on a pile of cushions placed strategically below. Above him, the hatch sealed shut, cutting off his view of Kane's lair. Bruised but undeterred, Marcus climbed to his feet and surveyed his surroundings. He was back outside the mansion, standing near his car. Dawn was breaking, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. Despite the setbacks, Marcus knew one thing for certain: he wouldn't rest until Kane faced justice. And somewhere, watching from the shadows, Kane smiled knowingly. Their battle of wits was far from over. The morning sun cast long shadows across the driveway as Marcus leaned against his car, catching his breath. His body ached from the fall, but his mind was sharper than ever. He replayed every moment of his encounter with General Kane, the traps, the puzzles, the cryptic messages, all designed to test his resolve. Marcus couldn't help but admire Kane's brilliance, even as it infuriated him. But admiration wouldn't stop him. Justice would. As he drove away from the mansion, Marcus knew he needed answers. Kane had left breadcrumbs throughout the house, hints of something bigger lurking beneath the surface. The files Marcus had glimpsed in the underground chamber hinted at operations far beyond petty theft or vandalism. Classified documents, surveillance footage, blueprints, it all pointed to something dangerous, something that could shake the foundations of power if exposed. Back at the police station, Marcus pored over the evidence he'd gathered so far. Notes scribbled during his time in the mansion, photographs of symbols and puzzles, and the envelope bearing Kane's taunting message sat spread across his desk. He stared at the note again. "I always stay one step ahead." Those words gnawed at him. How did Kane know exactly where to place each trap? How had he anticipated Marcus's moves? Then it hit him. Kane wasn't just playing games, he was studying Marcus. Every decision Marcus made, every path he chose, was being analyzed. The mansion itself was a testing ground, a way for Kane to measure his opponent's intelligence, patience, and resilience. And now, armed with that knowledge, Kane would be even harder to catch. Marcus clenched his fists, frustration bubbling inside him. But frustration wouldn't solve this case. Strategy would. If Kane wanted a battle of wits, Marcus was ready to give him one. Later that day, Marcus paid a visit to Dr. Evelyn Carter, an expert in cryptography and puzzle solving who occasionally consulted with law enforcement. She was known for her sharp mind and ability to crack codes that stumped even the most seasoned detectives. When Marcus arrived at her office, she greeted him with a warm smile, though her curiosity was evident. "What brings you here, detective?" she asked, gesturing for him to sit. "I need your help," Marcus said bluntly. "I'm dealing with someone complicated. A man named General Kane." Evelyn's expression shifted slightly. "Kane? That name rings a bell. Military background, right?" "Yes," Marcus confirmed. "He's brilliant, cunning, and dangerous. I've been inside his mansion twice, and both times I barely escaped with my life. He's built traps, puzzles, and riddles everywhere. I think they're not just obstacles. They're clues to understanding how he operates." Evelyn nodded thoughtfully. "Show me what you've got." Marcus laid out everything he'd collected. Photos of the chessboard, the hourglass, the glowing runes on the vault door, and the notes Kane had left behind. Evelyn examined each item carefully, her brow furrowing as she pieced together patterns. "These aren't random puzzles," she said after a while. "They're layered challenges, designed to reveal information about the solver. The chessboard tests strategy. The hourglass measures patience under pressure. The runes assess adaptability. Whoever created these knows human psychology well." "That's Kane," Marcus muttered. "But why go through all this trouble? Why not just kill me outright?" "Because he enjoys the game," Evelyn replied. "People like Kane thrive on proving their superiority. Killing you outright wouldn't satisfy him. Outsmarting you does." Her words sent a chill down Marcus's spine. Kane wasn't just a criminal. He was a predator who fed on intellectual dominance, and Marcus was his prey. For now. Armed with Evelyn's insights, Marcus devised a plan. If Kane wanted a game, Marcus would turn the tables. Instead of reacting to Kane's traps, he'd set his own. Using the evidence he'd gathered, Marcus reconstructed parts of Kane's puzzles in a controlled environment, a training ground to sharpen his skills. He practiced solving them faster, anticipating twists and thinking several steps ahead. Days turned into weeks as Marcus immersed himself in preparation. Meanwhile, he dug deeper into Kane's past, uncovering connections to high-profile crimes and corrupt organizations. It became clear that Kane wasn't working alone. He was part of a network, a shadowy web of power players manipulating events from behind the scenes. Exposing Kane meant dismantling that network entirely. But first, Marcus needed proof. And to get it, he'd have to infiltrate Kane's world once more. One evening, Marcus received another anonymous tip, an address scrawled hastily on a piece of paper. It led to an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. Suspicious yet, intrigued, Marcus decided to investigate. He arrived late at night, the moonlight casting eerie silhouettes across the crumbling structure. Inside, the air was thick with dust, and the sound of dripping water echoed through the empty space. At the center of the warehouse stood a table, its surface covered in papers and photographs. As Marcus approached, he realized they were documents detailing Kane's operations, plans for future schemes, lists of accomplices, and incriminating evidence linking him to illegal activities worldwide. But there was something odd about the setup. The documents seemed too conveniently placed, almost as if they were waiting for him. Suddenly, a voice boomed from the shadows. "Welcome back, Detective." Marcus spun around, his flashlight beam landing on Kane. Dressed in a dark trench coat, the general looked every bit the calculating mastermind Marcus had come to fear and respect. "You left these for me?" Marcus asked, gesturing to the documents. Kane smirked. "Consider it a gift, but remember, gifts often come with strings attached." Before Marcus could respond, alarms blared and spotlights flooded the warehouse. Armed men emerged from the darkness surrounding Marcus. Panic surged through him, but he forced himself to stay calm. This was Kane's doing, a final test to see if Marcus could escape impossible odds. Thinking quickly, Marcus grabbed a nearby metal pipe and used it to disable the nearest attacker. Using the chaos to his advantage, he fought his way toward the exit, dodging blows and countering strikes with precision. Just as he reached the doorway, a gunshot rang out, narrowly missing him. Kane stood at the far end of the warehouse, holding a pistol with a cold smile. "You're persistent, I'll give you that," Kane said. "But persistence alone won't save you." Marcus didn't reply. Instead, he bolted outside, disappearing into the night before Kane's men could follow. Though he escaped unharmed, the encounter left him shaken. Kane had anticipated his arrival at the warehouse, just as he'd predicted every other move Marcus had made. Winning this game wouldn't be easy, but Marcus refused to give up. Back at the station, Marcus reviewed the documents he'd managed to retrieve. They contained enough evidence to expose Kane's network, if he could find a way to use them, without falling into another trap. As he worked, he couldn't shake the feeling that Kane was watching, waiting for his next move. And somewhere in the shadows, Kane smiled. Their game was reaching its climax, and neither man intended to lose. The city buzzed with activity as dawn broke over Crestwood, but Detective Marcus Reed wasn't paying attention to the world outside. His focus was razor-sharp, locked onto the task ahead. The documents he'd retrieved from the warehouse were spread across his desk, each page a potential key to dismantling General Kane's empire. Yet, despite the evidence before him, Marcus knew this wasn't enough. Exposing Kane required more than just paperwork. It demanded proof that couldn't be dismissed or covered up. And for that, Marcus needed to confront Kane directly. Kane had always been one step ahead, predicting Marcus's every move. But now, it was time for Marcus to take control of the game. He spent hours analyzing the information, piecing together patterns and identifying weaknesses in Kane's operation. One name stood out repeatedly: Victor Hale, a high-ranking official rumored to have ties to Kane's network. If Marcus could get to Hale, he might find the leverage he needed to bring Kane down. With a plan forming in his mind, Marcus gathered a small team of trusted officers. They worked quietly, avoiding any communication that could tip off Kane's spies. By the time night fell, they were ready. Armed with warrants, surveillance equipment, and backup plans, they headed to Hale's estate, a sprawling property surrounded by towering fences and state-of-the-art security systems. As Marcus approached Hale's mansion, the sense of déjà vu was overwhelming. Like Kane's home, this place radiated menace, its dark windows reflecting the moonlight like unblinking eyes. But unlike Kane, Hale wasn't expecting trouble. At least, not yet. Using stolen access codes from the warehouse documents, Marcus bypassed the outer gates and led his team toward the main building. Inside, they moved swiftly, searching for anything that linked Hale to Kane's operations. It didn't take long to find what they were looking for. In Hale's private office, hidden behind a false wall, was a safe identical to the one in Kane's study. Marcus knelt in front of it, his fingers steady as he turned the dial. This time there were no traps waiting to spring, no puzzles designed to test his intellect, just cold hard evidence. When the safe opened, Marcus found stacks of incriminating files detailing illegal transactions, bribes, and covert meetings involving Kane and his associates. Among them was a video recording, a confession from Hale implicating Kane in crimes stretching back decades. It was exactly what Marcus needed, but as he reached for the files, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He glanced at the screen and froze. A text message read, "Congratulations, detective. You found my ace in the hole, but can you use it wisely?" Marcus cursed under his breath. Kane had known all along where the evidence was hidden, and he'd let Marcus find it. Why? What was the catch? Before Marcus could dwell on the question, alarms blared throughout the mansion. Red lights flashed, and voices shouted orders in the distance. Kane's men had arrived. Time was running out. Marcus signaled to his team, and they retreated quickly, carrying the files and the video recording with them. Outside, chaos erupted as armed guards surrounded the mansion, cutting off their escape routes. Trapped, Marcus realized this was Kane's final test, a chance for Marcus to prove he was truly worthy of defeating him. Thinking fast, Marcus remembered something Evelyn Carter had told him during their earlier meeting. People like Kane love theatrics. Use that against him. Inspiration struck. Instead of trying to fight their way out, Marcus activated the video recording and streamed it live to multiple news outlets and government agencies. Within minutes, the footage went viral, exposing Kane's crimes to the entire world. As the truth unfolded on screens everywhere, Kane's empire began to crumble. His allies abandoned him, fearing association with scandal. His operations collapsed under the weight of public outrage. And when authorities finally stormed Hale's mansion, they arrested everyone involved, including Victor Hale himself. But Kane was nowhere to be found. Days later, Marcus returned to the police station, exhausted but triumphant. The case was closed, or so it seemed. As he sat at his desk reviewing the aftermath, a familiar voice interrupted his thoughts. "Well done, detective." Marcus looked up to see Kane standing in the doorway, calm and composed despite the ruin of his empire. Dressed in civilian clothes, he looked less like a mastermind and more like an ordinary man, but Marcus knew better. "You're under arrest," Marcus said, rising to his feet. Kane raised an eyebrow. "For what?" "All the evidence points to Hale and his associates. My name is barely mentioned." "That's because you stayed in the shadows," Marcus replied. "But I know who you are, and sooner or later I'll find a way to make you pay." Kane chuckled softly. "Perhaps. But remember, detective, this isn't over. Games like ours never truly end." With that, Kane turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd before Marcus could stop him. Frustrated yet determined, Marcus vowed to continue the hunt. Kane might have escaped for now, but Marcus wouldn't rest until justice was served. Weeks passed and life in Crestwood slowly returned to normal. The media hailed Marcus as a hero, praising his efforts to expose corruption. But behind closed doors, Marcus remained vigilant. He knew Kane was still out there biding his time, waiting for the perfect moment to strike again. One evening, as Marcus sat alone in his office, a package arrived on his desk. There was no return address, only a single word scrawled on the wrapping. "Detective." Inside was a chessboard, its pieces arranged mid-game, and a note. "Checkmate is temporary. Until we meet again." Marcus stared at the board, a mixture of anger and admiration swirling inside him. Kane had evaded capture once more, but the game wasn't over. Not by a long shot, and somewhere in the shadows, Kane smiled, already planning his next move.